The ghost town of Summitville. What does that have to do with the creation evolution question? We're going to explore forensic science versus empirical science tonight. Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host Rich Gear here as well. That was easy for me to say, wasn't it, Doug? Anyway,
Well,
so I'm pretty excited about this, Doug, because I've been up there to this museum up where your house in Lewiston used to be, and I'm kind of fascinated to hear little bit about this and how it relates to this forensic as well as opposed to operational or empirical science. So why don't we let's start out. You Doug, you got all the background information on this place, you know?
yeah, this is a little bit about my family history, some Michigan history, and how it applies to the creation evolution question. I found an old ledger in a trunk of books in my grandmother's attic quite a number of years ago, and it came from this house in Lewiston that my family owned. My grandmother inherited it from her uncle, and it was actually maybe a cousin of hers instead of a uncle that she inherited it from. But this was owned by a fellow by the name of Elmer Thompson. And
Okay.
Elmer's uh, wife's name was Minnie Randall when she was growing up. And my great grandmother's name was Mabel Randall. And so this is Grandpa Jay. I have a picture of him sitting on the porch of this old house. And Grandpa Jay passed away about 1959. And so we were just very young when my grandmother inherited this house, and we used it as a vacation spot. And so, unfortunately, we sold the place in 1972, just getting too hard for my family to maintain it. And my grandma was getting up there in age, and so grandma and Aunt Margaret decided to sell it. And so, a few years later, I was exploring up in Grandma's attic, and I found this old trunk of, and inside of it was some very old books, some dating from 1863. The house that we had, we sold it in 1972. It was subsequently, maybe about 10 years later, torn down. And we were sort of dismayed about that because it sort of was a historical place. It actually had a lot of nice architecture. We could sleep about 16 people in this place.
I remember, Doug, because I actually spent a couple of nights there myself. You invited me up there one year. I can't remember what year it was now, but stayed overnight there in the place. And do you know why they tore it down, Doug?
Well, I think it was just getting too rickety to
Okay.
keep up. And
Okay.
I think Michael Sachs, who was the guy who inherited the place that you see behind me, it eventually became the Lewiston Area Historical Society Museum. But he decided that some of these old houses were uh, sort of eyesore, so he had them torn down. He
Sure.
bought them up,
Okay.
tore them down, and I know that Mrs. Sachs stored a lot of her antiques in the old house and rented it out to a family. I remember that when we went up there a couple of years ago, we actually met the family who had the house afterwards,
Oh, is
rented
that
it
right?
out.
Okay. Yeah.
And they had the bats in the attic, like we remembered, and so
Yep.
it was kind of an interesting thing. And later on, I had gone up there, and I think it was about 1991, where we met some people on a trip back from Florida, and they lived in Lewiston, actually a little bit north of Lewiston, and it was over by Elmer's Pond where they lived. And so she talked to us and invited us up for session of talking about Lewiston history, and that's when they were starting to build this historical society. And so I met some of the primary people who were part of that historical society.
It's quite
Now,
interesting, Doug. I remember when you and I went up there, was it maybe it's 2 years ago now? Maybe it's a year ago, 2 years ago, and you were finding out where certain things were located.
yeah,
I remember, unless you have an eyewitness or somebody who was there at the time, you wouldn't know where that was at. It was kind of it said this. I remember this was actually they put I can't remember what it was. They put a structure up.
outhouse. It
It
was
was
the
outhouse.
outhouse.
I
Yeah.
wasn't going to say outhouse. I thought it was the outhouse, and it was not quite in the right spot. And you knew exactly where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, but they ended up not putting it there anyway. But I had an old photograph of me and my
Yes.
cousin Shirley digging a hole to China next to the outhouse, and you could see in the background the neighbor's log cabin that was back there. So we could tell from that picture where the outhouse is located.
Yep.
That's kind of an interesting thing that we did, and I know that some of the historical people like to uh, dive into the bowels of an outhouse because a lot of times they threw bottles and things down there, and
Archaeologist, that's what it's all about, man. When I
yeah,
worked at the museum, Doug, that up in Fort Wilkins, they were digging in the outhouse, man. You find all kinds of stuff. But boy, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd like to, kind of a crappy job.
ah, jeez, okay. Anyway, there were about 30 books in that old trunk that we found in my grandma's attic, and one of them was a original edition of Longfellow's Wayside Inn, dated 1863. And then another one was this old home remedy and recipe book, which I've turned into a book, Dr. Hale's Home Remedy and Recipe Book. And so that's on our website. And, it's been kind of a popular book because it shows what the medicine was like back between 1844 and 1863.
Yeah.
So there was that book. But what we're talking about tonight is the old ledger that came from a ghost town of Summitville. Now, it
Mm.
turns out Summitville is on US 10 going between Reed City and Baldwin. And it's just about 4 miles west of Chase. But there is indeed a summit, but there's not a whole lot else there. I think you and I explored the area, didn't we?
How far
Yeah.
away is that from Lewiston again? I'm trying to remember how long it was we took.
Well, I went and Google Maps, and it's 134 miles away from Lewiston.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a ways. And why did we, and what was it? Oh, that's what was Randall, because his grave is there, right?
Yeah, his great. I remember looking at a book of ghost towns that we got out of the
Ah,
museum, and it mentioned my great grandfather's name in it
okay.
as being the guy who ran the Pure Marquette Railroad, and there were sawmills in the area, and there was a little bit of a civilization. And what we found in this ledger was really fascinating to me because it revealed a lot about life in the pioneer days of Michigan, and we ended up figuring out how the people that were involved in this. Now, in as well as happened was that Samuel Randall's grandson, it was named Edwin, and Edwin, he had taken this ledger, which had entries in it between 1839 and 1859, and he had drawn some beautiful drawings in this ledger.
Right. I remember
And
those.
there's one where he's uh, drew a picture of an Indian camp, and then he also had uh, slipped inside the ledger a whole bunch of newspaper clippings and articles, and then there was some advertisement from apparently the place that he had worked. His name was J. Bronson, and he had a store in Big Rapids, and it's kind of interesting to see the advertising from like 1872. There was a invitation to a dance in at the Chase Hotel in Chase, Michigan. Now, if you go through Chase today, there's not much there.
Yeah,
And
but
there's no,
there's still more there than at Summit right now.
yeah, that's right. And then a little bit further beyond is a little town called Nirvana. And there's a few houses in Nirvana. Um, People keep stealing the Nirvana city limit sign because because of the name, I guess.
Of course, yeah,
And
yeah.
so they don't have the sign for Nirvana anymore. But that is the cemetery where my great grandfather Samuel Randall and his grandson Edwin are buried next to each other. And apparently they passed away within a few
What
years.
did you say? Was it Edwin who died at 18? Who was only
Yeah, it
18?
was Edwin who died, and he was the guy who was the artist and the poet. And
Yeah. They,
this is a
boy,
guy I'm going to want to check out when I get to heaven because he just seemed to be a neat guy. He had such a romantic soul about him, and and so I started to research this all this stuff that he had written, and there is one poem that he wrote here, and this is really, in my mind, pretty fascinating. It was called "The Indian's Adieu," and this poem was about the Trail of Tears, and so I'm going to read this. This is kind of a it's got a quite an interesting message. It says, "Adieu to the grave where my fathers do rest, for I must be going, alas, to the west. I've sold my possessions, my heart is full filled with woe. Alas, I must leave all, alas, I must go. Adieu to the tall oak, that pleasant green shade, where I spent my childhood in innocent play, my dog and my hatchet, my arrow and bow. Alas, I must leave all, alas, I must go. Adieu to the scenes which do bind me like chains, as on my gray pony I pranced over the plains. The deer and the turkey will trace through the snow. Alas, I must leave all, alas, I must go. Adieu to something or other, that low, broken stream, no more shall I visit thee except in a dream. Likewise to green bushes where cranberries grow. Alas, I must leave all, alas, I must go. Adieu to the road which for many a year I've traveled each Sabbath, the gospel to hear. The news was so charming it pleased me so, o'er the great Mississippi, alas, I must go. Adieu to the white friends who taught me to pray and worship my Maker from day unto day. Oh, pray for poor native whose eyes overflow with tears at our parting. It grieves me to go. Adieu, I have severed my last earthly tie. I am bound for the West with my Savior to die. A white marble pillar will point out my tomb, but Jesus will guide me and take me up home.
was that written by Edwin, you said?
That was written by Edwin, yeah. Now,
Wow.
Edwin, he called himself Edward or Edgar in a couple of places, but
Okay.
he liked the poetry. I find it interesting that the people of that time enjoyed uh, poetry so much. We don't see that much anymore. You
So
know,
Doug, I want to kind of tie this in a little bit. It's like we start out there was forensic and empirical science or operational science, but I'm wondering, it's like right here we've got written records of what life was like in this area. Okay.
right.
And there are some photographic things, there might be some pictorial, but the evidence we have of what it was really like was all by written accounts. I mean, of what
That's
we
right.
have you know, and I mean, we have the grave sites of the grandfather Randall and and Edwin, and we have things like that. But we piece together information for today on the from the past based on what we would call forensic. ideas, and some of it is, some of it you can put evidences in the present, you can kind of extrapolate back, but you can't know for sure unless you have some written sources or accounts. Luckily for this, Doug, we have it for this time period, the 1830s, 1860s, or 1840s, 1860s. We have some evidence, but how does this relate to the creation story, Doug? How does this what we're talking about right now relate?
Well, that's exactly what happens in paleontology, where we dig up things that we find in the present and extrapolate back into the past what might have happened back in the past. And for example, we can't actually, when you have a rock that you find in the present, we cannot actually determine what that original composition of that rock was.
That
And
speaks to the radiometric
yeah,
issue, doesn't it? Yeah.
exactly. That's what I'm referring to is that, uh, and so we have to, I would say that the written record of the Bible is actually more reliable and accurate than what we find digging in the for example, if went out and dug around in Summitville, there's not much we're going to find that's going to tell the story that we find
No.
here in this ledger. And so I think you and I traced around in there. There's a two-track that we went down through, and
Yeah,
we found a cement slab, and it looked like a pavilion or something like that. But it looked like the long abandoned pieces of evidence that there was even a town there.
I know. I know.
Sometimes
It
you
reminds me that I've said this before. I says, you cannot find a Triceratops or T-Rex skull with a 65 million BC date on it. So
Mhm.
you have to extrapolate from the present things in the past. But they have rejected,
Uh,
people have rejected the accounts of when the world was created and what was created and how long ago these things happened in favor of only trying to extrapolate from the past but basically rejecting the written account. It'd be like us, Doug, trying to figure out Summitville from the slab or even the gravestones. And that would be kind of problematic. It seemed to be very, very much. You and I are not ones to reject forensic evidence. We think it's important, but to put things down as though this is the way it is based on only evidence from the present is really problematic. It's really difficult, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. I find that this Edwin Randall, like I said, this guy I really want to meet because he was a hopeless romantic.
He was.
And,
Sounds
uh,
from
and
his writings here, but
yeah,
yeah.
from his writings here, this Dreamland poem, I'll read this to you because it just tells a little bit about his personality. And it says, uh, come sit by my side in the twilight, oh girl with the violet eyes, and we'll dream while far on the
Ooh.
hilltops the sunset splendor dies. Come lay your head on my shoulder, your little hand in my own, and dream that the world is an Eden that holds us two alone. Let us build an airy castle in the summerland of dreams. We'll cover its lofty turrets with the gold of the sun's last beams. We'll have there the brightest blossoms, the sweetest singing birds, and the songs will be just the echo of the softly spoken words. We'll walk by the shores of the ocean, the girts on the dreamland inn, with the thought of the world's commotion, its bustle and busy din, but that will all be calm and quiet in the dreamland home of ours, with never a care or sorrow to mar the peaceful hours.
This guy's quite good. He's quite a
He's very
quite,
good. It's
wow. And
talk
he's
about spreading the butter on both sides. The bread.
wow. Do we
Uh,
know what he passed away from, Doug? Is there any evidence?
Well, there's a couple of other clues here. Some of his other poems are a little bit dark. There was one about him being estranged from his girlfriend, and
Oh,
I'm not, and his girlfriend's name was Rosebud, and he had several dreams about this lady, and so he was. I was sort of wondering if his death was a suicide because of the of these things. And then
Oh, that's
there's
sad.
another.
Oh,
So there's another one that was talking about I am lonely when my mother died. And I've got the, I'm going to have this on the article that's going to go with this TV show on our website. But I'm going to just uh, give examples of his artwork and his poetry. He had some artwork of what looked like the Three Musketeers, and some very romantic and fanciful things that he talked about in his poetry and artwork. And then he had newspaper cutouts, and there was actually a complete newspaper page in amongst all his collection that came from the Norwich Journal, which was dated October 13th, 1830. And this
okay.
journal was interesting because it gives you a snippet from one day in 1830 what the politics of the time was. It had an article about a execution of a fellow by the name of John Knapp, and it turned out to be a very famous case because it turned out to be a murder that took place in Salem, Massachusetts. And this guy, John Knapp, and his brother plotted the murder of their father. They figured
Whoa.
that he was not getting kicking off soon enough, and so they get his inheritance. And so what happened was there was a fellow that they contracted to do the hit, and so the guy got caught, and then they implicated these two guys that they set them up to do this. Well, back then the laws weren't set up to actually implicate a person for murder if they have a hitman. And so it was Daniel Webster who ended up arguing the case, and they got him set up to and eventually got them hung.
But when they're killed, when they're executed here in Michigan,
This was in Salem, Massachusetts.
now, oh, Massachusetts. So what's the Michigan connection? What's the connection with
Okay, the
Randall?
connection with Michigan is
Oh, he
that
has a,
this particular newspaper was signed by Green Randall, who was the father of Samuel G. Randall. And so Green Randall was my fourth great grandfather. And so
okay.
apparently Samuel migrated to the wilds of Michigan
Oh, okay. I
to
got, that's why I
operate
had the paper. All right.
so we had that newspaper from it, and I've got actually a lot of did a lot of research on the genealogy there.
Yeah, it just says here Green had 11, he had 11 brothers and sisters or what?
Yeah, it was a big family, and apparently they had lot of uh, a lot of influence in this Norwich, New York um,
Area,
area,
okay.
and so and the I traced the ancestry back to 1666 in westerly
Wow.
Massachusetts, and it's interesting that I have another ancestor on my mother's side that actually came from that same spot. So, that is a interesting aspect to my family genealogy. I had a lot of fun figuring all this stuff out. But here we have a written piece of newspaper that tells you a little bit about it. And the politics of the time was interesting too, because Henry Clay, he didn't like Andrew Jackson, and he set up and he didn't like him because he was a Mason, and so
Is that right? Okay.
he formed the anti-Masonry party, and they were going to try to depose Andrew Jackson and set Henry Clay up as president. And so
Really?
a lot of different machinations going on in this newspaper, and it's quite a study to read this newspaper. There's all kinds of mold on it and rips in it. It is kind of interesting for me to piece this little thing together to be able to read it. And so I'm going to have that on my website as well. It's just kind of an interesting read because it is a piece of forensic evidence that is actually a written evidence that is will give you a good picture of what actually happened back then.
Okay, yeah.
Apparently, this Knapp case was fairly famous because I found more information on it on the internet. So, but this was the account of that hanging that took place back then, and it was pretty interesting. Um,
See, and
so that
again, Doug, the best evidence was the written evidence, you know?
best
And I
evidence is written
submit the
evidence.
best evidence for the origin of the world is the written evidence of the Bible. That's the
Yeah,
best, it's the best evidence. Even the archaeology stuff where we have written accounts from human written things are not nearly as good as the biblical record. They're just not nearly
that's
as
right.
good.
Now, I have a picture, a photograph of my great grandfather, John Randall. And he was kind of a strange character to figure out because I got his picture. My grandma actually showed it to me when I found this ledger. She was still alive then. And but she had some photographs of herself with him as a little girl and her and her sister Margaret was also in that picture, but this was probably around 1910, 1913 or something like that. So my grandma uh, apparently was born in Howard City, and my great grandfather moved around a lot. He had a job where he took him out to Paris, Idaho, and he built a canal. He actually was going to go down and work on the Panama Canal at one point in time. But
Wow.
when it was
Well, Doug, I guess we're running kind of getting low on time here. I guess we're about ready to got to fix that. I could talk about going to venture this for a long period of time, but I guess we got to kind of end it pretty quick, don't we?
Yeah, this is quite an adventure for me, and I think that I could probably talk about this for hours, but I think that this is enough for tonight. We'll see
Yeah, I
you.
know. It was very fascinating trip down memory lane.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.